In the mist-shrouded village of Millbrook, where ancient stones whisper forgotten secrets and the boundary between life and death grows thin with each passing twilight, a desperate woman's gamble with mortality would awaken forces that had slumbered for centuries. When Anna Walsh chose the cold embrace of a grave over the suffocating prison of an unwanted marriage, she could never have imagined that her desperate deception would unravel a conspiracy reaching back through generations of carefully guarded mysteries. This is the tale of how a gravedigger's compassion and a woman's courage would challenge not only the cruel traditions of Victorian society, but the very laws that govern the realm between the living and the dead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to Millbrook like a shroud, its tendrils weaving through the crooked chimneys and weathered stone cottages with an almost sentient purpose. Anna Walsh pressed her face against the cold window of her prison, watching Thomas Fletcher work in St. Margaret's cemetery beyond the iron gates of Ashford Manor. His methodical movements as he tended the ancient graves had become her only source of hope during these final days before her forced wedding to William Ashford. Thomas worked with a precision that spoke of years spent among the dead, his weathered hands guiding the spade through soil that had been turned countless times before. There was something different about him, Anna noticed, something that set him apart from the other villagers who crossed themselves when passing the cemetery gates. Where others hurried past the weathered headstones with nervous glances, Thomas moved among them with the calm reverence of someone who understood that death was not an enemy, but simply another chapter in an ancient story. The cemetery itself seemed to respond to his presence. The wild roses that grew along the stone walls bloomed unseasonably, their petals catching the weak sunlight like drops of blood against the grey morning. The ancient yew trees that marked the boundary between consecrated ground and the wild. Moors beyond swayed without wind, their branches creating shadows that seemed to dance to music only they could hear. Local gossip painted Thomas as a simple man, a widower who had taken the gravedigger's position after losing his wife to the fever that had swept through Millbrook 5 years ago. But Anna had spent enough time watching from her window to notice details that escaped the village's casual observation. The way he paused at certain graves, not just to tend them, but to listen, as if the stones themselves were whispering secrets. The careful patterns he traced with his tools, movements that seemed more like ritual than mere maintenance. Most telling of all, the strange visitors who came to see him under cover of darkness, figures who moved with purpose through the mist and left before dawn, could reveal their faces. Anna had begun to suspect that Thomas Fletcher was no ordinary gravedigger, just as St. Margaret's was no ordinary cemetery. William Ashford's voice boomed from the courtyard below, discussing arrangements for tomorrow's wedding with his sister, Catherine, and the village magistrate. Anna's stomach clenched at the sound, her hands gripping the window frame until her knuckles turned white. 3 months ago, her father's gambling debts had sealed her fate, trading her future to William, in exchange for forgiveness of the money owed. The arrangement benefited everyone except Anna herself, a detail that seemed to matter little to the men making decisions about her life. William was not cruel in the obvious ways that would garner sympathy from the village. He was methodical in his control, systematic in his possession of everything he considered his property. Anna had seen how he treated his horses, his land, his servants, with the same calculated ownership he already applied to her. She was to be another acquisition, valuable for the children she would bear and the respectability her family name would lend to his growing influence in the county. The thought of spending her life as nothing more than a decorative addition to his collection of possessions made her skin crawl with revulsion. Catherine Ashford's sharp laughter cut through the morning air like a blade. William's sister had made it clear that Anna's role in the household would be strictly defined and carefully monitored. There would be no books beyond those deemed appropriate for a lady's education, no correspondence without Catherine's approval, no ventures beyond the estate grounds without escort. The life stretching before Anna was one of gilded captivity, comfortable perhaps, but utterly without freedom or choice. As Thomas continued his work in the cemetery, Anna found herself wondering about the stories hidden among those weathered stones. Who had loved and lost within those boundaries? Which of the dead had fought against fates they couldn't control? The thought struck her with sudden clarity that perhaps death was not the worst thing that could happen to a person. Perhaps there were forms of living that were worse than dying, and perhaps the grave offered its own kind of liberation from earthly prisons. The idea formed slowly in her mind, taking shape like mist condensing into water. If she could not escape her fate through conventional means, perhaps she could escape it through unconventional ones. The village doctor, Dr. Emma Thompson, had mentioned during a recent visit that certain herbs could slow the heart to a barely detectable rhythm, creating the appearance of death while preserving life. It was dangerous knowledge, the kind whispered about in medical circles but never openly discussed. Anna had filed the information away at the time, never imagining she might have used for such desperate measures. But desperation had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. If she could convince everyone she had died, if Thomas Fletcher could be persuaded to help her escape the confines of a coffin after the burial ceremony, she might find a way to flee Millbrook entirely. It was a plan born of desperation and fueled by the certain knowledge that life as William's wife would be a slow death anyway, just one without the mercy of eventual release. The risks were enormous. The herbs might kill her truly instead of merely creating the appearance of death. Thomas might refuse to help or might not understand her desperate signals from within the coffin. Even if everything went according to plan, she would be alone in the world, with no money, no connections, and no legal existence beyond the grave that supposedly held her body. But as Anna watched William gesture possessively toward the rooms that would become her prison, she realized that any uncertain future was preferable to the certain misery that awaited her as his wife. Thomas Fletcher paused in his work, looking up toward the manor as if sensing her gaze. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Anna felt something pass between them, an understanding that transcended words. There was kindness in his weathered face, but also something deeper, a recognition of suffering that suggested he had faced his own impossible choices. Anna pressed her palm against the window in a gesture that was half greeting, half plea, and watched as Thomas touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before returning to his work. The gesture gave her hope that perhaps her desperate plan might not be as impossible as it seemed. Thomas Fletcher had the gentle demeanor of someone who understood that sometimes mercy required breaking rules, that sometimes compassion demanded unconventional actions. If she could find a way to communicate her plan to him, if she could convince him that helping her would be an act of salvation rather than grave robbing, she might yet escape the fate that awaited her. Mary O'Connor arrived that afternoon with the final fittings for Anna's wedding dress, her cheerful chatter about lace and pearls, a sharp contrast to Anna's inner turmoil. Mary had been Anna's friend since childhood, one of the few people who seemed to understand the horror of the situation without needing it explained. As she pinned and adjusted the elaborate gown that would serve as Anna's costume for her own captivity, Mary's eyes held a sadness that matched Anna's own. During a brief moment when Catherine had left them alone, Anna leaned close to her friend and whispered her desperate plan. Mary's face went pale, her hands trembling as she continued working with the fabric. The idea was madness, she said, the kind of scheme that belonged in Gothic novels rather than real life. But as Anna explained her reasoning as she painted the picture of what her life would become as William's wife, Mary's protests grew weaker. By the time Catherine returned, Mary had agreed to help, though her agreement came with tears and fears that Anna tried not to share. The plan they developed was simple in its desperation. Mary would obtain the necessary herbs from Dr. Thompson under the pretense of treating her own nervous condition. Anna would take them the morning of the wedding, timing the dose to take effect during the ceremony itself. The shock of the bride collapsing at the altar would create enough chaos to mask any subtle signs of life that might give away the deception. Mary would ensure that Thomas Fletcher was informed of the plan through a carefully coded message, hoping that his apparent kindness would extend to helping a desperate woman escape her fate. As evening fell over Millbrook, Anna stood at her window watching Thomas complete his day's work in the cemetery. The setting sun painted the weathered stones in shades of gold and crimson, transforming the ancient graveyard into something beautiful rather than morbid. She wondered about the lives represented by those markers, whether any of them had faced choices as desperate as her own. Tomorrow night, if their plan succeeded, she would lie among them, hidden in the earth, while the world above mourned her. In passing, it was a terrifying thought, but also strangely comforting. Among the dead, she would finally be free from the living who sought to control her. The sound of William's laughter drifted up from the parlor below, where he was entertaining the magistrate with stories of his business dealings. Anna shuddered at the casual cruelty in that laughter, the way it suggested that other people's suffering was merely another form of entertainment. Tomorrow, she would either escape his influence forever or die trying, and at this moment, both. Options seemed preferable to the alternative that awaited her at the altar. Thomas Fletcher walked slowly toward the cemetery gates, his day's work complete. As he passed beneath Anna's window, he looked up once more, and in that brief glance, Anna thought she saw understanding, perhaps even a promise. Whether he would truly help her remained to be seen, but for the first time in months, Anna felt something other than despair. Tomorrow would bring either liberation or death, and after so many weeks of living death under William's control, either outcome felt like a form of victory. The night settled over Millbrook like a blessing, wrapping the village in darkness that seemed to promise that some secrets could still be kept, some freedoms still won, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Anna Walsh prepared for what might be her last night alive, hoping that when morning came, she would find the courage to gamble everything on a gravedigger's mercy and a desperate woman's will to be free. The wedding bells of St. Margaret's Church began their mournful toll at dawn, their bronze voices carrying across the mist-laden village like harbingers of doom. Anna Walsh sat at her dressing table, her reflection pale as porcelain in the silvered glass, while Mary O'Connor worked with trembling fingers to arrange her hair in the elaborate style Catherine Ashford had demanded. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The small vial of herbs hidden within Anna's jewelry box seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, a tiny vessel containing either salvation or destruction. Mary's hands shook as she wove pearls through Anna's dark curls, each movement careful and deliberate despite her obvious distress. They had spent the sleepless night refining their desperate plan, going over every detail until their whispered words became a litany of hope and terror. The herbs would take effect slowly, Dr. Thompson had explained to Mary, under the guise of treating feminine vapors, first causing dizziness and weakness, then slowing the heart until it barely whispered against the ribs. The timing would be crucial, the dose carefully measured to create the appearance of death without crossing into its actual embrace. Through the bedroom window, Anna could see Thomas Fletcher making his way through the cemetery with unusual purpose. His movements today carried a different quality, less of the methodical routine she had observed for months, and more of a man preparing for something significant. He paused at several graves, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or conversation, his weathered hands tracing symbols in the morning dew that covered the weathered stones. Anna wondered if Mary had successfully conveyed their coded message, if Thomas understood what would be asked of him before this day ended. The morning light revealed details about St. Margaret's cemetery that Anna had never noticed from her distant window. Ancient symbols were carved into many of the older headstones, markings that seemed older than the Christian crosses that topped them. The layout of the graves followed patterns that suggested purpose beyond simple burial convenience, creating geometric designs that were visible only from the elevated position of the manor. Most intriguing of all, certain sections of the cemetery seemed to shimmer in the early light, as if the very air above them held different properties than the atmosphere surrounding them. Catherine Ashford swept into the room like a storm cloud, her black silk rustling with authority as she inspected Anna's appearance with the cold efficiency of a general reviewing troops. Every detail had to be perfect, she declared, from the angle of Anna's veil to the positioning of her grandmother's brooch. This wedding was not merely a ceremony, but a display of the Ashford family's power and taste, an exhibition that would be discussed throughout the county for months to come. Anna's role was to be beautiful, compliant and grateful, nothing more complicated than an ornamental addition to William's collection of valuable possessions. The wedding dress itself felt like a shroud, its heavy silk and intricate beadwork, weighing Anna down with the expectations of everyone around her. The bodice was laced so tightly that breathing required conscious effort, creating the perfect conditions for the mysterious fainting spell that would soon overcome the nervous bride. Mary had sewn hidden pockets into the dress's elaborate folds, creating spaces where Anna could conceal the small items she hoped to take with her into whatever life awaited beyond the grave. Dr. Emma Thompson arrived to check on the bride's health, her medical bag containing the usual remedies for wedding day nerves. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her middle years, one of the few females in the county who had managed to carve out an independent professional life despite society's expectations. Her examination of Anna was thorough, but discreet, her knowing glances suggesting she understood more about the situation than she was willing to voice in Catherine's presence. When she pressed a small packet of smelling salts into Anna's hand, her fingers lingered just long enough to convey a message of support and understanding. The village below began to stir with wedding preparations, carriages arriving from neighboring estates to bring guests for the afternoon ceremony. Anna recognized many of the faces from her window, local gentry who had watched her grow up and who would now witness what they believed to be her transformation from maiden to wife. None of them seemed to question whether she desired this transformation, whether her happiness factored into the elaborate celebration being staged for their entertainment. She was simply another element in the grand theatre of Victorian propriety, and playing her assigned role without regard for her own desires or fears. William's voice boomed from the courtyard as he greeted arriving guests with hearty laughter and expansive gestures. He was in his element today, the successful businessman, displaying his latest acquisition to an audience of peers and rivals. Anna could hear him discussing her family's lineage with the same tone he might use to describe the breeding of a particularly valuable horse, cataloguing the benefits her bloodline would bring to his own legacy. The casual objectification in his words made her stomach turn, strengthening her resolve to escape this fate regardless of the risks involved. Thomas Fletcher continued his mysterious activities in the cemetery, his movements now drawing curious glances from some of the arriving wedding guests. He seemed to be preparing specific graves for something, clearing weeds and arranging flowers with unusual care. Anna noticed that he paid particular attention to a recent burial in the newer section of the cemetery, a grave that would serve perfectly for her desperate deception. The headstone bore the name of Margaret Whitmore, a young woman who had died the previous month, whose resting place would now provide cover for Anna's rebirth into a different kind of existence. As midday approached, Mary helped Anna into her wedding slippers and adjusted her veil one final time. The small vial of herbs remained hidden in the jewelry box, waiting for the moment when Anna would commit to her desperate gamble. Mary's eyes were red with unshed tears, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by the gravity of someone participating in what might be her dearest friend's final act. They embraced carefully, mindful of the elaborate dress, each knowing that, if their plan succeeded, this might be their last moment together for a very long time. The sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones announced the arrival of Father Patrick Kelly, who would perform the wedding ceremony with the same solemn authority. He brought to all the church's sacraments. Anna had known him since childhood, had taken communion from his hands and sought his counsel during difficult times. But today she wondered if he would unknowingly preside over her symbolic death, as well as her marriage. The irony was not lost on her that the same man who would unite her to William in the bonds of matrimony might also deliver the funeral rites that would free her from those same bonds. Through her window, Anna watched the wedding guests begin to make their way toward St. Margaret's Church, their fine clothes and cheerful conversations creating a festive atmosphere that contrasted sharply with her inner turmoil. These were people who lived within the safe boundaries of social convention, who had never faced choices between death and a living hell, who would be shocked to learn of the desperate drama unfolding in their midst. Their innocence seemed both enviable and frustrating, a reminder of the simpler life Anna was leaving behind in her quest for freedom. Thomas Fletcher disappeared from view as the guests filled the churchyard, but Anna caught a glimpse of him near the cemetery's newer section, where Margaret Whitmore's grave waited with its freshly turned earth. The sight gave her courage, suggesting that their coded message had indeed reached him and that he was preparing to play his part in the desperate theater they had devised. Whether motivated by compassion, curiosity, or something deeper, Thomas seemed willing to risk his own reputation to help a woman he barely knew escape a fate worse than death. The time had come to make her choice. Anna retrieved the small vial from her jewelry box, its contents representing either salvation or destruction, freedom or oblivion. The herbs would begin their work slowly, giving her time to reach the church and begin the ceremony before the collapse that would change everything. Mary squeezed her hand one final time, her tears finally spilling over as Anna raised the vial to her lips and drank its bitter contents, sealing her fate with one desperate swallow. The interior of St. Margaret's Church hummed with anticipation as the village's finest families filled the ancient pews, their silk gowns and polished boots creating a tapestry of wealth and respectability beneath the stone arches that had witnessed centuries of similar ceremonies. Anna Walsh walked down the aisle on her father's trembling arm, her smile fixed in place like a mask, while the bitter taste of the herbs lingered on her tongue and her heart began its slow descent toward the rhythm of the grave. Father Patrick Kelly stood at the altar in his finest vestments, the gold embroidery catching the colored light that streamed through the stained glass windows depicting scenes of saints and martyrs. His weathered face bore the serene expression of a man comfortable with the sacred rituals of his calling, unaware that he was about to preside over a ceremony that would challenge the very boundaries between life and death. The leather-bound prayer book in his hands contained words that had joined countless couples in matrimony, but today those same words would serve as the backdrop for Anna's desperate bid for freedom. William Ashford waited at the altar with the satisfied expression of a man claiming his prize, his formal attire impeccable, and his posture radiating the confidence that came from always getting what he wanted. He watched Anna's approach with the calculating gaze of someone inspecting a valuable acquisition, his eyes noting every detail of her appearance with the same attention he might give to evaluating livestock or property. The smile he offered her held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of ownership successfully claimed. The wedding guests represented the cream of local society, their presence serving as both celebration and validation of the union taking place before them. Anna recognized faces from years of social gatherings, people who had watched her grow from child to woman and who now witnessed what they believed to be her natural progression into married life. Their approving smiles and knowing glances suggested they saw nothing unusual in a young woman being traded to settle her father's debts, viewing such arrangements as simply the way the world worked for people of their class and station. Catherine Ashford occupied the front pew like a queen holding court, her severe black dress and calculating expression making her appear more like a mourner than a celebrant. She watched every detail of the ceremony with sharp attention, ensuring that her brother's investment in Anna would be properly displayed for the assembled audience. The satisfaction in her eyes suggested that she viewed this wedding as much as a business transaction, as a romantic union, another successful negotiation that would strengthen the Ashford family's position in county society. As the ceremony began, Anna felt the first effects of the herbs coursing through her system like ice water in her veins. A subtle dizziness began to cloud her vision, and her breathing became shallow and careful. The words of the marriage service seemed to echo from a great distance, as if she were hearing them from the bottom of a deep well. Father Kelly's voice, asking if she took William as her husband, sounded like a question posed to someone else entirely, a stranger wearing her face and dress. Her father's hand on her arm trembled with more than age or emotion, his own complicity in her fate weighing heavily on his conscience, even as he prepared to hand her over to William's keeping. The gambling debts that had necessitated this arrangement had consumed more than money. They had devoured his daughter's future and his own peace of mind. Anna could feel his reluctance in the way his fingers lingered on her arm, as if some part of him understood that he was delivering her to a form of captivity that would destroy whatever love had once existed between them. The congregation's attention focused entirely on the drama unfolding at the altar, their fascination with the elaborate ceremony blinding them to the smaller drama of a woman slowly dying before their eyes. Anna's breathing grew more labored, her vision beginning to tunnel as the herbs continued their inexorable work. She forced herself to remain upright through sheer will, knowing that the timing of her collapse would be crucial to the success of their desperate plan. Thomas Fletcher remained invisible to the wedding guests, but Anna sensed his presence beyond the church walls, preparing for his role in the macabre theatre they had devised. The cemetery waited in the afternoon shadows, its ancient stones and careful arrangements ready to provide sanctuary for a woman seeking refuge in the realm of the dead. The irony was not lost on Anna that her salvation lay among the graves, that freedom could only be found by embracing the very fate that most people spent their lives avoiding. Dr. Emma Thompson sat near the back of the church, her medical bag discreetly positioned for easy access should her services be required. Her sharp eyes monitored Anna's condition with professional interest, noting the subtle signs of distress that would be invisible to untrained observers. The packet of smelling salts she had given Anna remained unused in the bride's bouquet, waiting for the moment when theatrical revival would be necessary to sell the deception to the gathered witnesses. Mary O'Connor occupied a servant's place near the rear of the church, her tear-stained face reflecting the genuine grief of someone watching her dearest friend commit to a path that might lead to actual death rather than merely its appearance. Her hands twisted her handkerchief into knots as she watched Anna sway slightly at the altar, the herbs beginning to take their full effect just as they had planned. The knowledge that she had helped orchestrate this desperate deception weighed heavily on her conscience, but her love for Anna outweighed her fear of the consequences. The moment arrived with sudden clarity as Anna felt her knees buckle and her vision narrow to a tunnel of fading light. She collapsed gracefully, her elaborate wedding dress billowing around her like the wings of a dying swan, her bouquet scattering across the stone floor in a shower of white roses and baby's breath. The congregation erupted in gasps and exclamations, their festive mood instantly transformed into one of shock and concern as the bride lay motionless at the altar steps. Father Kelly dropped to his knees beside Anna's still form, his weathered hands checking for signs of life, while Dr. Thompson pushed through the crowd with her medical bag. William's expression shifted from satisfaction to annoyance to genuine concern as he realized that his carefully planned acquisition might be slipping away from him. The wedding guests pressed forward for a better view, their morbid curiosity overcoming their social restraint as they witnessed a bride's mysterious collapse at the very moment of her vows. Dr. Thompson's examination was performed with theatrical precision, her professional assessment delivered in grave tones that convinced even the most skeptical observers. Anna's pulse was barely detectable, her breathing so shallow as to be virtually imperceptible, her skin taking on the pallor of approaching death. The herbs had done their work perfectly, creating the appearance of a sudden and fatal collapse that no one could explain or prevent. The pronouncement of death fell upon the congregation like a physical blow, transforming a wedding celebration into an impromptu wake. Father Kelly performed the last rites with solemn efficiency, while the guests looked on in stunned silence, their festive clothing now seeming inappropriate for the tragedy unfolding before them. William's face showed a complex mixture of emotions. Disappointment at losing his bride, concern for his social standing, and genuine confusion about how his carefully orchestrated plans had gone so wrong. Catherine Ashford's reaction was perhaps the most telling, her calculating mind already working to determine how this development would affect the family's reputation and business interests. The death of a bride at the altar would be talked about for years, potentially casting a shadow over future Ashford endeavors if not handled properly. Her sharp commands to the servants and guests revealed a woman more concerned with damage control than genuine grief for the young woman whose life had apparently ended before their eyes. As Anna lay motionless on the cold stone floor, surrounded by the shocked faces of the wedding guests, she felt an odd sense of peace despite the mortal danger of her situation. The herbs coursed through her system like liquid twilight, slowing her heartbeat to barely a whisper, while maintaining just enough life to preserve her consciousness. She was balanced on the knife's edge between existence and oblivion, trusting her fate to a gravedigger's compassion and a friend's loyalty. Preparations for her burial began immediately, the practical necessities of death overriding the emotional shock of the tragedy. Anna's body was carefully lifted and transported to the manor, where she would lie in state before the funeral that would hopefully complete her transformation from living woman to escaped soul. The wedding guests departed in hushed groups, their conversations already beginning the process of turning tragedy into legend, creating the stories that would ensure Anna Walsh was remembered as the bride who died at the altar rather than the woman who chose death over enslavement. The manor's drawing room had been transformed into a chapel of mourning, with Anna's body lying in peaceful repose upon a bier draped in white silk. and surrounded by arrangements of lilies and roses that filled the air with their funeral perfume. Candles flickered at the head and foot of her makeshift catafalque, their golden light playing across her still features and creating the illusion of life where none was supposed to exist. The herbs continued their deadly work through her system, maintaining the perfect balance between apparent death and hidden vitality that would sustain her through the long hours until burial. William Ashford paced the perimeter of the room like a caged animal, his wedding attire now seeming mockingly formal in the presence of his deceased bride. His initial shock had given way to a cold fury at being denied his prize, though he directed his anger at fate rather than at Anna herself. She had become even more valuable to him in death than she had been in life, a romantic tragedy that elevated his social standing while simultaneously denying him the practical benefits of marriage. The irony that his bride had escaped him through the ultimate act of defiance was lost on him entirely. Catherine Ashford supervised the funeral arrangements with the same meticulous attention she had given to the wedding preparations, transforming personal tragedy into social theatre with ruthless efficiency. The guest list for tomorrow's funeral had already been expanded to include dignitaries from across the county, turning Anna's burial into an event that would be remembered for years to come. Her sharp commands to the servants revealed a woman determined to extract maximum social benefit from even the most tragic circumstances. Mary O'Connor maintained her vigil beside Anna's body with the devotion of a true friend, her genuine tears providing perfect cover for the desperate hope that flickered in her heart. She alone knew that Anna might still live beneath the deathly pallor, that consciousness might exist behind those closed eyelids, that the still chest might yet harbor a heart beating too slowly to detect. Her whispered prayers were not for Anna's soul, but for her survival, pleas to whatever powers might be listening to preserve her friend through this dangerous gamble. Dr. Emma Thompson had departed after confirming the death with professional certainty, but not before sharing a meaningful glance with Mary that suggested her involvement in the deception. Her medical expertise had been crucial in determining the proper dosage of herbs, and her authoritative pronouncement of death had convinced even the most skeptical observers. The knowledge that she carried was dangerous, making her complicit in a fraud that could destroy her professional reputation if discovered. Father Patrick Kelly arrived to offer spiritual comfort to the grieving household, his presence lending additional legitimacy to the fiction of Anna's death. He had known her since childhood, had prepared her for confirmation and heard her confessions, making his genuine sorrow at her passing all the more convincing to those who observed his ministrations. The prayers he offered over her body were sincere, even if they were meant for a living woman rather than a departed soul. Throughout the long afternoon, a steady stream of visitors came to pay their respects to the tragic bride, their faces reflecting the mixture of fascination and horror that sudden death inspired in the living. Anna lay perfectly still through each visitation, her breathing so shallow as to be undetectable while her consciousness drifted in the strange liminal space between life and death. She heard their voices as if from a great distance, their words of sympathy and speculation floating over her like conversations from another world. The local magistrate arrived to investigate the circumstances of Anna's death, his questions probing but not suspicious as he sought to understand how a healthy young woman could collapse so suddenly at her wedding altar. Dr. Thompson's medical expertise proved invaluable in deflecting his inquiries, her professional assessment of heart failure convincing him that no criminal investigation was warranted. The official documentation of Anna's death would be filed with the same bureaucratic efficiency as any other mortality, creating the legal fiction that would allow her to disappear entirely from her former life. As evening approached, the household settled into the rhythms of mourning, with family members and close friends maintaining watch over Anna's body through the night. Mary volunteered for the darkest hours, ensuring that someone who knew the truth would be present during the most dangerous period of the deception. The herbs would gradually lose their effect as her body processed them, making it crucial that she be buried before any signs of returning life became apparent to observers. Thomas Fletcher appeared at the manor's service entrance as darkness fell, his presence explained as a consultation about the burial preparations. His weathered face revealed nothing as he examined Anna's body with professional detachment, but Mary caught the subtle signs that confirmed his understanding of their desperate plan. The arrangements he discussed with Catherine were practical and thorough, ensuring that everything would be ready for a dawn burial that would conclude Anna's transition from living woman to escaped soul. The cemetery beyond the manor's walls seemed to pulse with anticipation in the moonlight, its ancient stones and careful arrangements ready to play their part in the drama unfolding within the house. Thomas had spent the afternoon making final preparations, ensuring that Margaret Whitmore's grave would serve its dual purpose as both burial site and birthing chamber for Anna's new existence. The tools he would need were already positioned near the gravesite, hidden among the normal implements of his trade. Anna's perception of time became fluid as the night progressed, her consciousness drifting between awareness and oblivion while her body maintained its deathly stillness. She could hear the whispered conversations of her watchers, the soft prayers that Mary offered over her still form, the practical discussions about burial arrangements that would soon determine her fate. The knowledge that she was balanced on the edge of actual death made every moment precious and terrifying, each heartbeat a victory over the oblivion that threatened to claim her. The manor's grandfather clock chimed the passing hours with funeral solemnity, its bronze voice marking Anna's progress through the most dangerous night of her life. Each chime brought her closer to the dawn burial that would either complete her escape or become her actual interment, depending on whether Thomas Fletcher proved worthy of the trust she had placed in him. The uncertainty was maddening, but it was preferable to the certain doom she would have faced as William's wife. Mary's vigil continued through the darkest hours, her presence both comforting and necessary as she watched for any signs that the herbs were losing their effect. Anna's breathing remained barely perceptible, her pulse virtually undetectable, her skin maintaining the pallor of death even as life continued its tenuous hold within her still form. The balance was precarious, maintained through precise chemistry and desperate hope, requiring constant vigilance to prevent discovery. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the drawing room windows, the household began its final preparations for Anna's burial. The coffin that Thomas had provided was simple but well made, its interior lined with soft fabric that would cushion her during the terrible journey to the grave and back. Hidden beneath the visible lining were the tools she would need if she awakened while underground, items that might mean the difference between rescue and actual burial. The funeral procession would begin within the hour, carrying Anna's body to St. Margaret's Cemetery, where Thomas Fletcher waited with his own terrible responsibilities. The success of their plan now depended on precise timing, careful coordination, and the hope that a gravedigger's compassion would prove stronger than his respect for social convention. Anna Walsh was about to discover whether her desperate gamble with death would purchase the freedom she sought or merely exchange one form of imprisonment for another. The funeral procession wound its way through Millbrook's narrow streets like a serpent of black silk and polished wood, the hired mourners adding their professional grief to the genuine sorrow of those who had known Anna Walsh in life. Her coffin, borne on the shoulders of 6 somber men, swayed gently with their measured steps as they made their way towards St. Margaret's Cemetery, where Thomas Fletcher waited beside the open grave that would serve as both tomb and cocoon for her desperate transformation. Father Patrick Kelly led the procession with his prayer book clutched against his chest, his voice rising and falling in the ancient cadences of the burial service, while the morning mist swirled around the mourners like the spirits of the previously departed. Behind him, William Ashford walked with the measured dignity of a man publicly grieving his lost bride, though his eyes held more calculation than sorrow as he considered how this tragedy might be turned to his advantage in future business dealings. Catherine Ashford followed in her carriage, her black mourning dress and severe expression creating the perfect image of a grieving sister-in-law, while her sharp mind catalogued every detail of the ceremony for future social reference. The elaborate funeral she had orchestrated would be talked about for months, establishing her family's reputation for proper respect for the dead, while simultaneously demonstrating their financial resources and social connections. Mary O'Connor walked among the genuine mourners, her tears real even though their source was hope rather than grief, her eyes constantly searching for any sign that Anna might be stirring within her wooden prison. The knowledge that her dearest friend lay in a coffin, balanced between life and death, made every step toward the cemetery feel like a journey into nightmare. Yet she also knew that this burial represented Anna's only chance for freedom, making the funeral procession both ending and beginning. Dr. Emma Thompson observed the proceedings with professional interest, her medical knowledge allowing her to calculate how much time remained before the effects of the herbs would begin to wear off. The dosage had been carefully measured to last through the burial ceremony and into the early hours of the night, but human physiology was never entirely predictable. Anna's survival depended on Thomas Fletcher's ability to complete the rescue, before her body's natural processes overcame the artificial death that protected her. The cemetery gates stood open like the maw of some ancient beast, their iron scrollwork creating intricate patterns against the grey morning sky. Beyond them, the weathered headstones of generations past watched silently as another soul prepared to join their eternal vigil, unaware that this particular burial would be unlike any they had witnessed before. The mist that perpetually shrouded St. Margaret seemed thicker today, as if the very atmosphere understood the deception being played out beneath its concealing embrace. Thomas Fletcher stood beside Margaret Whitmore's grave with his hat in his hands and his weathered face composed, in the expression of professional solemnity that his position required. The fresh earth of the recently dug grave lay mounded beside the opening, ready to cover Anna's coffin in the final act of her staged death. Hidden among his normal grave-digging tools were the implements he would need for the rescue that would follow, carefully positioned for quick access once the mourners departed. The grave itself had been prepared with unusual care, its sides shored up with wooden planks that would prevent collapse during the rescue operation. Thomas had worked through the night to ensure that Anna's temporary tomb would not become her permanent resting place, his experience with similar excavations serving him well in this most unusual application of his skills. The depth was calculated to provide convincing burial while allowing for relatively quick excavation when the time came. As the procession reached the cemetery, Father Kelly began the graveside service with words that had comforted the bereaved for centuries. His voice carrying clearly across the assembled mourners while Anna lay motionless within her coffin. The prayers for the dead took on an ironic quality given their subject's actual condition, but they served their purpose in creating the ritual framework that would legitimize her disappearance from the world of the living. The coffin was lowered into the earth with careful ceremony, its wooden surface disappearing beneath the lip of the grave as Anna began her descent into the realm that existed between life and death. The ropes that guided its progress creaked softly in the morning air, their sound marking each foot of Anna's journey toward the temporary tomb that would either shelter her rebirth or become her final resting place. Mary fought to control her emotions as dirt began to fall onto the coffin's lid, each shovelful bringing Anna closer to the suffocating darkness that would test her courage and Thomas's skill. The sound of earth striking wood echoed with funeral finality, creating the auditory backdrop for what appeared to be the end of Anna Walsh's story, but was actually the beginning of her transformation into someone entirely new. William Ashford threw the first handful of dirt onto his bride's coffin with theatrical grief, his performance convincing enough to draw sympathetic murmurs from the assembled mourners. His words of farewell spoke of love and loss, though his eyes already held the calculating look of a man considering his options for replacing what he had lost. Anna's death had freed him to pursue other advantageous marriages, making her escape ironically beneficial to his future plans. The burial proceeded with the mechanical efficiency that Thomas Fletcher brought to all his work, each shovelful of earth precisely placed to create the proper appearance while minimizing the amount he would need to remove during the rescue operation. His movements showed no sign of the inner tension he must have felt, knowing that a living woman lay beneath the accumulating soil, trusting her life to his discretion and skill. As the grave filled and the mourners began to depart, Thomas shaped the mound with practiced hands, creating the traditional appearance of a fresh burial while secretly marking the spots where his tools would find purchase during the night's work. The wooden marker that would serve until a proper headstone could be carved bore Anna's name and dates, with no indication that her death had been anything other than natural tragedy. The last of the mourners disappeared through the cemetery gates as afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the weathered headstones, leaving Thomas alone with his terrible secret and awesome responsibility. Anna Walsh lay 6 feet beneath the earth, trapped in darkness and silence, her survival dependent on the kindness of a man she barely knew, and the hope that their desperate plan had not been too clever for its own good. Evening approached with the slow inevitability of fate, bringing with it the moment when Thomas Fletcher would discover whether his agreement to help a desperate woman would result in rescue or in the grave robbing of an actual corpse. The cemetery settled into its nocturnal stillness, with only the sound of his breathing and the distant cry of night birds to break the silence that surrounded Anna's temporary tomb. The work ahead would be dangerous and difficult, requiring precise timing and careful execution to avoid the discovery that would destroy them both. Thomas gathered his tools with the methodical preparation of a man about to attempt something that challenged both law and nature, his weathered hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to undertake. Anna Walsh's fate now rested in the capable hands of a gravedigger who understood that sometimes mercy required breaking rules, that sometimes compassion demanded actions that the respectable world would never approve. The long night ahead would determine whether her desperate gamble with death had purchased the freedom she sought, or merely exchanged one form of captivity for the ultimate imprisonment of the grave. Midnight struck the church bell tower with 11 solemn chimes, each bronze note rolling across the cemetery like a summoning call to the restless dead. Thomas Fletcher worked by the pale light of a shuttered lantern, his spade cutting through the earth that covered Anna Walsh's coffin with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that lives hung in the balance of his midnight labor. The mist that perpetually shrouded St. Margaret's seemed to thicken around him, as if the very atmosphere sought to conceal his desperate excavation from watching eyes. The soil came away easier than he had expected, his careful preparations during the burial allowing for swift removal of the earth that had seemed so final just hours before. Each spadeful revealed more of the wooden coffin beneath, its polished surface gleaming dully in the lantern light as Thomas worked to free Anna from her temporary tomb. The knowledge that she might already be dead, that his rescue attempt might become grave robbery, drove him to work faster despite the need for caution and silence. Something moved in the shadows beyond the circle of lantern light, a shift in the darkness that made Thomas pause in his digging to peer into the gloom surrounding Margaret Whitmore's grave. The cemetery at night held different qualities than its daytime appearance, with sounds and movements that had no clear source and shadows that seemed to possess their own will. The ancient yew trees that marked the boundary between consecrated ground and the wild moors whispered without wind, their branches creating patterns against the star-filled sky that suggested purpose beyond mere natural growth. The shovel struck wood with a hollow sound that seemed to echo far longer than physics should have allowed, the noise carrying across the cemetery with supernatural clarity. Thomas paused to listen for any response, any sign that his nocturnal activities had attracted unwanted attention, but heard only the usual sounds of night creatures going about their mysterious business. The village of Millbrook slept peacefully beyond the cemetery walls, its inhabitants unaware that one of their recently dead was about to return to the realm of the living. Working by feel as much as sight, Thomas cleared the earth from around the coffin's edges, his weathered hands recognizing the quality of craftsmanship that had gone into Anna's temporary resting place. The wood was solid, but not too thick, designed to contain a living woman rather than preserve a corpse for eternity. Hidden catches and hinges had been built into the lid, invisible modifications that would allow Anna to escape from within if she awakened before rescue arrived. The moment of truth arrived as Thomas fitted his crowbar beneath the coffin's lid, the metal tool finding purchase in the gaps he had deliberately left during the burial preparation. The wood protested with a soft creaking sound as he applied a pressure, the nails that held the lid in place pulling free with reluctant squeaks that seemed impossibly loud in the cemetery's midnight stillness. Each nail that came loose brought him closer to discovering whether Anna Walsh lived or whether he was about to desecrate an actual corpse. The lid lifted away to reveal Anna's still form, her wedding dress now serving as a burial shroud in the confined space of the wooden box. Her skin held the waxy pallor of death, her lips blue with the cold of the grave, her breathing so shallow as to be imperceptible even to Thomas's experienced observation. For a terrifying moment, he wondered if their plan had failed, if the herbs had carried her too far into the realm of death to return to the world of the living. Then her eyes opened, focusing on his face, with the slow recognition of someone returning from a great distance. Her lips moved without sound, trying to form words that her weakened condition would not allow, her hand rising with enormous effort to touch his weathered face in a gesture of gratitude and relief. The joy in her eyes spoke volumes about the terror she had endured during her hours of conscious burial, trapped in darkness with only hope to sustain her through the ordeal. Thomas helped her sit up in the narrow confines of the coffin, her movements unsteady and weak from the effects of the herbs and the trauma of her underground imprisonment. The wedding dress that had seemed so elegant at the altar now appeared ghostly and inappropriate, its white silk and elaborate beadwork marking her as a woman who belonged to the world of the living rather than the realm of the dead. Her transformation from corpse to living person required more than simply opening the coffin. It demanded a complete reimagining of her identity and purpose. Supporting Anna's weight with his strong arms, Thomas helped her climb from the coffin that had served as both prison and sanctuary, her feet touching the cemetery earth with trembling uncertainty. The physical act of leaving the grave marked her symbolic rebirth, her emergence from the world of the dead into a new existence that would require courage and determination to sustain. The woman who had been buried as Anna Walsh would need to become someone entirely different if she hoped to survive in a world that believed her dead. The cemetery around them seemed to respond to Anna's resurrection with subtle shifts in atmosphere and shadow, as if the ancient spirits that dwelt among the weathered headstones recognized the significance of what had just occurred. The mist swirled in new patterns, creating momentary shapes that might have been welcoming gestures from those who had crossed the boundary between life and death before her. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with approval, acknowledging Anna's successful navigation of the treacherous passage between worlds. Dr. Emma Thompson emerged from the shadows near the cemetery's eastern wall, her medical bag, ready to provide assistance to the newly resurrected woman. Her presence confirmed Thomas's suspicion that their conspiracy involved more participants than he had initially realized. That Anna's escape had been planned with careful attention to every detail that might ensure its success. The doctors' professional skills would be crucial in helping Anna recover from the traumatic effects of her deliberate poisoning and burial. Mary O'Connor appeared beside Dr. Thompson, her face streaked with tears of relief and joy at seeing her dearest friend, alive and breathing above ground once more. She carried a bundle of plain clothes that would replace Anna's elaborate wedding dress, garments that would help her blend into the anonymous crowd of working women rather than stand out as a member of the gentry. The transformation from lady to commoner would be as significant as her passage from death to life, requiring the abandonment of everything that had defined her previous existence. The practical necessities of Anna's escape required immediate attention despite the emotional magnitude of her resurrection. The wedding dress had to be removed and destroyed, eliminating evidence of her survival that might lead investigators back to their conspiracy. Her appearance needed to be altered enough to prevent recognition by casual observers who might remember the face of the tragic bride who had died at the altar. Most importantly, she needed to be transported away from Millbrook before dawn brought new risks of discovery. Thomas worked with quiet efficiency to fill in the grave, replacing the earth he had so carefully removed while the women attended to Anna's physical transformation. The mound of soil that marked her supposed resting place had to appear undisturbed to prevent suspicion from any early morning visitors to the cemetery. His years of experience with burial and excavation served him well in creating the perfect illusion of an undisturbed grave, complete with the natural settling that would be expected after a night's rest. Anna's recovery proceeded slowly as Dr. Thompson administered treatments to counteract the lingering effects of the poisonous herbs. The careful balance between death and life that had sustained her through the burial was gradually shifting back toward full vitality, though the process left her weak and disoriented. Her voice returned first as a whisper, then gradually strengthened as she regained control over her physical functions and began to comprehend the full magnitude of what she had accomplished. The plain dress that Mary provided felt strange against Anna's skin after the elaborate wedding gown, its rough fabric and simple cut marking her descent from lady to servant in the social hierarchy. The transformation was more than merely sartorial. It represented a fundamental change in her relationship with the world around her. The privileges and protections that had come with her birth and social position were now lost to her, replaced by the dangerous freedom of anonymity and self-determination. Father Patrick Kelly joined their unlikely group as the false dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, his presence adding spiritual weight to the conspiracy that had brought Anna back from the dead. His knowledge of ancient rituals and forgotten ceremonies would prove valuable in the strange journey that lay ahead, for Anna's resurrection had awakened forces that were older and more complex than any of them fully understood. The cemetery itself seemed to pulse with renewed energy, as if her successful passage between worlds had activated dormant powers that had slept for generations. The gathered conspirators understood that Anna's escape was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would challenge their understanding of life, death, and the mysterious forces that governed both. The cemetery that had served as the stage for her resurrection held secrets that stretched back through centuries of careful guardianship, mysteries that were now awakening in response to the unprecedented event they had just witnessed. Anna Walsh had died and been reborn, But her new life would bring responsibilities and dangers that none of them could yet imagine. The abandoned mill on the outskirts of Millbrook provided perfect shelter for Anna's continued recovery. Its crumbling walls and broken machinery offering concealment from any search parties that William Ashford might organize. Thomas Fletcher had prepared this hideaway weeks ago, stocking it with supplies and simple furnishings that would sustain Anna during her transition from dead heiress to living fugitive. The building's isolation and decay made it unlikely to attract visitors, while its proximity to the ancient forest paths would provide escape routes if discovery threatened their sanctuary. Anna sat wrapped in coarse wool blankets beside a carefully shielded fire, her face still pale from her ordeal, but her eyes bright with the fierce joy of freedom finally achieved. The simple bread and broth that Mary brought sustained her recovering body, while the knowledge of her successful escape nourished her spirit. Every breath of free air felt like a victory over the forces that had sought to trap her in a life of genteel servitude. Every moment of choice and self-determination, a celebration of the terrible risk she had taken to claim her independence. Dr. Emma Thompson continued to monitor Anna's physical condition, her medical expertise ensuring that the lingering effects of the deadly herbs would not cause permanent damage to her patient's constitution. The careful balance between poison and preservation that had enabled Anna's deception required equally careful management during her recovery, with specific antidotes and treatments to restore her body's natural functions. The doctor's willingness to participate in such an elaborate deception spoke to her own understanding of the desperate circumstances that drove women to extreme measures in pursuit of freedom. Thomas Fletcher revealed more of his mysterious background as he shared stories of other women he had helped escape impossible situations through careful manipulation of burial customs and social expectations. His position as gravedigger provided perfect cover for activities that challenged conventional morality while serving a higher justice. His access to coffins and burial grounds enabling rescues that would have been impossible for ordinary citizens to attempt. The network of allies he had cultivated over the years included doctors, clergy, and other professionals who understood that sometimes mercy required breaking rules. Father Patrick Kelly brought ancient texts from the church archives, leather-bound, volumes that contained references to resurrection rituals and boundary crossings that predated Christian doctrine by centuries. The ceremonies that had enabled Anna's successful passage between life and death drew upon traditions that were far older than the established church, practices that had been carefully preserved by generations of guardians who understood their true significance. The priest's willingness to participate in Anna's resurrection revealed his own connection to mysteries that existed beyond orthodox religious teachings. Mary O'Connor served as the group's connection to the outside world, her position as a servant, allowing her to move freely through Millbrook while gathering information about the official response to Anna's death and burial. The village buzzed with gossip about the tragic bride who had died at the altar, with theories ranging from divine judgment to family curses explaining the mysterious circumstances of her collapse. William Ashford's public grief seemed genuine, enough to deflect suspicion, though Mary detected signs of calculation beneath his theatrical mourning. The mill's ancient stones seemed to respond to Anna's presence with subtle warmth, as if the building itself approved of the sanctuary it provided for someone who had successfully navigated the treacherous boundary between worlds. Strange symbols, carved into the foundation blocks, suggested that this structure had served similar purposes in the past, providing shelter for individuals whose circumstances required concealment from conventional society. The abandoned machinery created perfect hiding places for supplies and equipment, while the mill wheel's steady creaking provided acoustic cover for conversations that needed to remain secret. As Anna's strength returned, she began to experience unusual sensitivities and perceptions that had not existed before her burial and resurrection. Colors appeared more vivid. Sounds carried meaning beyond their literal content, and the very air seemed to hold currents of energy that she could sense but not fully understand. Dr. Thompson's examination revealed no physical explanation for these enhanced abilities, suggesting that Anna's passage through death had awakened capacities that were spiritual rather than medical in nature. The forest paths that surrounded the mill showed signs of recent use by travelers who preferred to avoid official roads and established settlements. Thomas explained that these ancient tracks had served as routes for smugglers, refugees, and others whose business required discretion throughout the centuries of human habitation in the region. The network of hidden trails would provide Anna with escape routes if her presence in the area was discovered, connecting to similar paths that extended throughout the countryside like arteries of an underground circulation system. Strange visitors began to appear at the mill during the darkest hours of night. Individuals whose faces remained hidden but whose voices carried the authority of those accustomed to dealing with supernatural matters. They spoke in whispers with Thomas and Father Kelly about events that had been set in motion by Anna's resurrection, developments that apparently had significance beyond the simple escape of one woman from an unwanted marriage. Their presence suggested that Anna's deception had activated networks and awakened forces that had remained dormant for generations. The conversations that Anna overheard revealed references to ancient organizations and secret societies that had protected individuals who challenged the established order through supernatural means. Her successful resurrection had apparently marked her as someone worthy of their attention and protection, though the full extent of their influence and capabilities remained mysterious. The knowledge that she was not alone in her struggle against conventional authority provided comfort, even as it raised questions about the true nature of the forces she had unknowingly invoked. Documents appeared in the mill during one of these mysterious visits, papers that provided Anna with a new identity, complete with fabricated history and legitimate-seeming credentials. The craftsmanship of these forgeries spoke to resources and expertise that far exceeded what her small group of allies could have produced independently, suggesting that their conspiracy was connected to larger networks of individuals who specialized in helping people disappear from their old lives and emerge with new ones. The transformation required more than simply changing Anna's name and appearance. It demanded a fundamental alteration of her manner, speech, and expectations to match her new station in life. The privileges and assumptions that had shaped her existence as a member of the gentry had to be abandoned in favor of the practical knowledge and humble demeanor appropriate to her new identity as a working woman. Mary served as her teacher in this transformation, sharing the skills and attitudes that would help Anna blend seamlessly into the anonymous crowd of servants and laborers. Anna's dreams during her recovery were filled with visions of the cemetery and the moments of her burial, but also with images of places and people she had never seen in waking life. These nocturnal journeys seemed to carry information about the broader implications of her resurrection, revealing connections between her personal escape and larger patterns of resistance against oppressive authority. The boundary between dream and reality became increasingly fluid as her supernatural sensitivities continued to develop. The ancient mill wheel began to turn without water to drive it, its massive wooden spokes rotating slowly in response to currents of energy that had no visible source. Thomas and Father Kelly exchanged meaningful glances at this development, their expressions suggesting that they recognized the significance of this supernatural manifestation. Anna's presence had apparently awakened dormant forces within the structure itself, transforming the abandoned mill into something more than mere shelter for a fugitive. The time for departure was approaching as Anna's recovery neared completion, and the risks of remaining in the area continued to increase. The new identity that had been prepared for her would require travel to distant regions where her face was unknown, and her story could not be challenged by those who remembered the tragic bride of Millbrook. The network of allies that had enabled her resurrection would also facilitate her journey to a new life, providing safe houses and trusted contacts along routes that had served similar purposes for generations of refugees from conventional society. The ancient forest that bordered Millbrook's eastern boundary stirred with unnatural activity as figures moved through the shadows between massive oak and ash trees, whose roots reached deep into soil that had been sacred long before the village's founding. Anna Walsh stood at the mill's broken window, her newly awakened senses detecting movements and presences that would have been invisible to her before her resurrection, watching as torchlight flickered between the trees in patterns that suggested coordination rather than random wandering. Thomas Fletcher emerged from the mill's depths, carrying weapons that seemed far too sophisticated for a simple gravedigger's collection, their craftsmanship speaking of military origins and specialized training. His transformation from humble cemetery worker to armed guardian happened with fluid efficiency, revealing skills and knowledge that he had carefully concealed beneath his rustic exterior. The ease with which he handled the equipment suggested that his current occupation was merely a cover for activities that required different expertise entirely. Dr. Emma Thompson opened her medical bag to reveal compartments containing items that had nothing to do with conventional healing, her supplies including substances and instruments that belonged more to an alchemist's laboratory than a physician's practice. Her knowledge of the herbs that had enabled Anna's false death was apparently just one facet of a much broader understanding of chemistry and biology that extended into realms that orthodox medicine would never acknowledge. The transformation of their quiet conspiracy into something resembling a military operation happened with startling swiftness. Father Patrick Kelly shed his clerical robes to reveal clothing better suited for travel through dangerous territory, his ancient texts replaced by maps and documents that showed locations and routes unknown to conventional geography. The priest's scholarly demeanor gave way to the alert posture of someone accustomed to navigating hostile situations, his knowledge of resurrection rituals complemented by practical experience with escape and evasion techniques. The man who had performed Anna's burial service was clearly much more than a simple village clergyman. Mary O'Connor returned from her reconnaissance mission with disturbing news about the forces that were converging on Millbrook in response to Anna's mysterious resurrection. The official investigation into her death had attracted attention from authorities whose interest seemed to extend far beyond simple curiosity about a bride's sudden collapse at the altar. Strangers were asking questions about the cemetery's history and the circumstances of recent burials, their inquiries suggesting knowledge that should not have been available to ordinary investigators. The torchlight in the forest grew brighter and more organized as the watchers revealed themselves to be members of what Thomas identified as the Order of the Silver Dawn, a secret organization whose opposition to supernatural activities had made them dangerous enemies of anyone who challenged the conventional boundaries between life and death. Their presence in the area meant that Anna's resurrection had not gone unnoticed by forces whose mission was to prevent exactly the kind of boundary crossing she had successfully accomplished. Anna felt strange energy stirring within her body. As the external threats approached, her resurrection apparently having awakened abilities that were only now beginning to manifest themselves fully. The enhanced perceptions that had seemed like mere side effects of her ordeal were revealing themselves to be something much more significant, supernatural capabilities that connected her to currents of power that flowed through the ancient landscape. Like invisible rivers, Her transformation from ordinary woman to something unprecedented was accelerating in response to the approaching danger. The mill's ancient machinery began to operate with increasing intensity, its wheels and gears turning without any visible source of power while creating sounds that resembled music more than mechanical noise. The building itself seemed to be transforming into something that existed partially outside normal reality, its walls becoming permeable to energies and forces that operated according to laws older than human civilization. Anna's presence had apparently activated defenses that had been built into the structure's very foundation. Messages arrived through channels that bypassed conventional communication methods, their contents appearing on surfaces throughout the mill without any visible messenger delivering them. The information they contained revealed the scope of the forces mobilizing in response to Anna's resurrection, with factions both hostile and friendly converging on the area for reasons that extended far beyond her personal escape from an unwanted marriage. Her individual act of defiance had apparently triggered events that would reshape the balance of power between natural and supernatural authority. The Order of the Silver Dawn's torches formed patterns in the forest that created geometric designs, visible from the mill's upper windows, their arrangements suggesting ritual purposes that went beyond simple illumination. Thomas explained that these formations were meant to channel and focus energies that would weaken supernatural defenses, while strengthening the Order's ability to detect and combat otherworldly influences. The approaching confrontation would be fought with weapons and tactics that existed outside the realm of conventional warfare. Anna discovered that her connection to the mill's awakening defenses allowed her to perceive the Order's movements with supernatural clarity, her consciousness somehow linking with the building's ancient protective systems to create awareness that extended far beyond her physical location. The ability to see through stone walls and across vast distances revealed itself gradually, along with other capabilities that challenged her understanding of what human beings were supposed to be able to accomplish. Dr. Thompson's preparations revealed the full extent of her involvement in networks that specialized in protecting individuals whose circumstances required supernatural intervention. Her medical practice served as cover for activities that involved preserving and enhancing human capabilities that orthodox science refused to acknowledge. Her patients, including others who had undergone transformations similar to Anna's resurrection. The conspiracy that had enabled Anna's escape was apparently just one small part of a much larger conflict between opposing visions of reality. The forest itself began to respond to the Order's presence with signs of distress and resistance, its ancient trees creaking and swaying without wind, while shadows moved in patterns that defied the positions of moon and stars. The land around Millbrook held memories and allegiances that predated human settlement, its loyalty belonging to forces that had been worshipped and respected long before Christian churches replaced older forms of sacred observance. The approaching battle would determine whether these ancient powers could protect those who honored the old ways. Father Kelly's maps revealed escape routes that connected to a network of safe houses and allied strongholds stretching across the countryside like a hidden infrastructure designed to support individuals whose circumstances required protection from conventional authority. Anna's journey to a new life would take her through territories where different rules applied, where her supernatural abilities would be assets rather than dangers, where her resurrection would be celebrated rather than feared. The mill's defenses reached full activation as midnight approached, its ancient stones glowing with soft light while currents of protective energy created barriers that would be invisible to ordinary perception but impenetrable to hostile forces. Anna found herself at the center of these preparations, her presence somehow essential to the building's ability to resist the Order's assault. Her resurrection had not merely saved her from an unwanted marriage, It had awakened her to a destiny that involved protecting others who challenged the established boundaries between possible and impossible. The sound of approaching horses carried through the forest air as the Order of the Silver Dawn prepared for their final assault. Their torches forming a circle around the mill, while their chanted invocations sought to overwhelm the ancient protections that defended its inhabitants. Anna Walsh stood ready to discover whether her new life would survive its first test, whether the forces that had enabled her resurrection would prove strong enough to protect her from those who viewed her very existence as an abomination against natural law. The ground beneath the mill began to tremble as the Order of the Silver Dawn's chanted invocations reached a crescendo, their voices weaving together in harmonies designed to shatter the protective barriers that surrounded the ancient building. Anna felt the vibrations through the soles of her feet, the very foundation stones resonating with energies that seemed to awaken sleeping giants deep within the earth itself. The mill wheel's rotation accelerated beyond any mechanical possibility, its massive wooden spokes blurring into a circle of power that defied both gravity and conventional physics. Thomas Fletcher positioned himself at the mill's main entrance, with weapons whose design incorporated symbols and materials that belonged to traditions far older than conventional metallurgy. His stance revealed training that went beyond simple military service, his movements flowing with the precision of someone who had spent years learning to combat supernatural threats. The gravedigger's humble exterior had been completely shed, replaced by the bearing of a warrior priest whose mission involved protecting the boundary between worlds from those who would exploit it for their own purposes. Dr. Emma Thompson worked frantically to complete preparations that would enhance Anna's newly awakened abilities while protecting her from the psychic assault that accompanied the Order's physical approach. Her alchemical knowledge proved crucial in creating protective compounds that could shield human consciousness from supernatural attacks. Her medical training adapted to serve purposes that would never appear in any official textbook. The transformation of healing arts into defensive warfare happened with practiced efficiency, born of long experience with such confrontations. Father Patrick Kelly stood at the mill's eastern wall, chanting counter-invocations in languages that predated Latin by millennia, his voice carrying authority that came from direct connection to powers that had been honored long before organized. Religion established its dominion over spiritual matters. The priest's knowledge of ancient rituals proved essential in maintaining the mill's defenses against the Order's assault, his understanding of sacred geometry allowing him to strengthen weak points in the protective barriers. Anna discovered that her consciousness could merge with the mill's defensive systems in ways that transformed her from protected refugee into active participant in the building's resistance to attack. Her awareness expanded beyond her physical body to encompass the entire structure, her will becoming part of the ancient intelligence that had been built into the foundation stones by craftsmen who understood the true nature of the forces they were seeking to channel and control. The Order's assault intensified as their torches formed complex patterns around the mill's perimeter, their geometric arrangements designed to create focal points for energies that could penetrate supernatural defenses through harmonic resonance. The attackers moved with military precision despite their religious trappings, their coordination revealing extensive training in techniques for combating otherworldly opponents. Their equipment included instruments whose purposes extended beyond simple illumination or communication into realms of psychic warfare. Mary O'Connor emerged from the mill's depths, carrying items that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, her usual demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of someone accessing knowledge and abilities that had been carefully hidden beneath a servant's humble exterior. Her connection to the ancient forces that protected the mill revealed itself through actions that transcended her supposed station in life, her hands moving with practiced certainty as she activated defenses that had been prepared long before Anna's arrival. The mill's interior transformed as dormant mechanisms awakened throughout the building, gears and wheels that had seemed like abandoned machinery revealing themselves to be components of a vast mystical engine designed to channel and amplify supernatural energies. The structure's true purpose became apparent as walls shifted to reveal hidden chambers filled with artifacts and instruments whose functions belonged to sciences that conventional learning had forgotten or deliberately suppressed. Anna felt her connection to the mill's systems deepen as the assault reached its peak, her consciousness merging with currents of power that flowed through the ancient stonework like blood through veins. The building's defensive capabilities were vast, but required human will to direct them effectively, her resurrection having created the spiritual bridge necessary to access systems that had remained dormant for generations. Her individual escape from an unwanted marriage had awakened forces that would reshape the balance between natural and supernatural authority. The order's chanting reached frequencies that caused windows to crack and timbers to groan, their harmonic assault designed to find resonant frequencies that would shatter the mill's protective barriers through acoustic disruption. Thomas and Father Kelly worked together to create counter-harmonies that neutralized the attackers' sonic weapons. Their combined knowledge of both military tactics and mystical principles proving essential in maintaining the building's integrity against sophisticated assault. Supernatural manifestations began to appear throughout the mill as the defensive systems reached full activation. Spirits and entities that had been bound to the structure's protection materializing to serve as guardians against the order's intrusion. These beings revealed themselves to be former inhabitants who had chosen to remain after death, to continue serving the mill's mission of protecting those who challenged conventional boundaries. Anna's resurrection had awakened not just mechanical defenses, but spiritual allies whose loyalty transcended the grave. The forest around the mill erupted into supernatural warfare as ancient powers that dwelt among the trees responded to the order's presence with violent opposition. The very landscape seemed to come alive in defense of the sacred site, with branches becoming weapons and shadows taking physical form to combat the attackers. The battle expanded beyond the conflict between human factions to encompass a struggle between opposing visions of reality itself. Dr. Thompson's alchemical preparations reached completion as she administered substances to Anna that would enhance her connection to the mill's systems while protecting her consciousness from the psychic backlash of the ongoing assault. The enhancement process was dangerous but necessary. Her medical expertise adapted to serve purposes that pushed human physiology beyond its normal limitations. Anna's transformation from ordinary woman to supernatural guardian accelerated under the pressure of immediate necessity. The Order's assault revealed their true capabilities as they deployed weapons that combined advanced engineering with mystical principles, their siege engines capable of targeting spiritual defenses as effectively as physical barriers. The attackers' coordination suggested extensive preparation for this specific confrontation, their knowledge of the mill's capabilities indicating intelligence gathering that must have taken months or years to complete. The battle was not a random encounter, but the culmination of a long-planned campaign. Anna's consciousness expanded to encompass not just the mill, but the entire network of ancient sites that dotted the landscape like nodes in a vast protective grid, her awareness revealing the true scope of the conflict in which she had become involved. The Order's attack on the mill was apparently part of a larger campaign to destroy or control these sacred locations, their ultimate goal being the suppression of supernatural abilities that challenged conventional authority. Her individual resurrection had become a symbol of resistance that threatened their vision of ordered reality. The mill wheel's rotation reached impossible speeds as it channeled energies that seemed to draw power from the earth itself. Its ancient, wood glowing with internal fire while creating a sound that resonated through dimensions beyond normal human perception. Anna found herself at the center of this mystical cyclone, her will directing forces that could reshape reality according to intentions that transcended individual desire or fear. The woman who had sought only to escape an unwanted marriage was becoming something that could challenge the fundamental assumptions about what human beings were capable of achieving. The mill's defensive systems reached critical resonance as Anna's consciousness merged completely with the ancient machinery, her human awareness expanding to encompass energies that had been carefully contained within the structure's mystical architecture for centuries. The building itself seemed to come alive around her, its stones pulsing with heartbeat rhythms, while currents of power flowed through hidden channels that connected every chamber and corridor in a vast network of supernatural circulation. Her, individual, will become part of a collective intelligence that had been waiting generations for someone capable of awakening its full potential. The Order of the Silver Dawn's assault reached desperate intensity as their leaders realized that the mill's defenses were not merely resistant, but actively growing stronger in response to their attacks. The geometric patterns they had created with their torches began to waver and collapse, as counter-energies emanating from the building disrupted their carefully calculated formations. Their chanted invocations faltered as supernatural forces within the mill began to assert dominance over the local spiritual environment, turning their own weapons against them through harmonic interference. Thomas Fletcher's true nature revealed itself as he shed the last vestiges of his gravedigger disguise, his weathered features taking on an otherworldly quality that spoke of heritage that was only partially human. The weapons he wielded responded to his will with intelligence of their own, their ancient craftsmanship incorporating materials and techniques that bridged the gap between metallurgy and mysticism. His role as guardian of the cemetery had been preparation for this moment, his years of tending the boundary between life and death, providing the experience necessary to protect Anna during her transformation. Dr. Emma Thompson's alchemical knowledge reached its culmination as she completed the enhancement process that would allow Anna to survive the tremendous energies now flowing through her consciousness. The substances she administered were not merely chemical compounds, but spiritual catalysts that enabled human physiology to interface with forces that existed beyond the normal boundaries of matter and energy. Her medical practice had been cover for research into the enhancement of human capabilities that conventional science refused to acknowledge. Father Patrick Kelly's counter-invocations shifted into languages that seemed to predate human speech itself, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with fundamental frequencies of creation. The priest's scholarly pursuits had led him to knowledge that transcended any single religious tradition, his understanding of sacred texts revealing connections between disparate belief systems that all pointed toward the same underlying truths about the nature of reality. His role in Anna's resurrection was part of a larger mission to preserve and protect wisdom that orthodox institutions sought to suppress. The mill wheel's rotation created a vortex of energy that began to tear openings in the fabric of reality itself, revealing glimpses of dimensions that existed parallel to the normal world but operated according to different laws of physics and consciousness. Anna's awareness expanded through these interdimensional apertures, her consciousness exploring realms where her newly awakened abilities would be considered natural rather than supernatural. The boundaries between possible and impossible were dissolving under the pressure of forces that had been unleashed by her resurrection, Mary O'Connor's true identity emerged as she revealed knowledge and abilities that belonged to a hereditary line of guardians whose mission involved protecting ancient sites from those who would exploit their power for destructive purposes. Her position as a servant had provided perfect cover for monitoring threats while maintaining the defensive systems that kept the mill's true nature hidden from casual observation. Her loyalty to Anna transcended friendship to encompass shared membership in a network of individuals whose heritage connected them to traditions that predated recorded history. The Order's weapons began to malfunction as the mill's defensive energies reached sufficient intensity to disrupt their technological systems, their sophisticated equipment proving vulnerable to forces that operated outside the electromagnetic spectrum. The attackers' coordination broke down as their communication devices failed and their sensing instruments provided contradictory readings about the nature of the threats they faced. Their confidence in superior technology was being undermined by encounters with powers that existed beyond the reach of conventional science. Anna felt her individual identity beginning to merge with something vastly larger and more ancient than herself, her consciousness becoming part of a collective awareness that encompassed all the sacred sites in the region and the guardians who protected them. The woman who had sought only personal freedom was being transformed into a nexus for forces that could reshape the balance between natural and supernatural authority throughout the countryside. Her resurrection had awakened not just her own abilities, but dormant potentials that existed within the landscape itself. The forest surrounding the mill erupted into full supernatural warfare as ancient spirits that dwelt among the trees manifested in physical form to combat the Order's forces. These entities revealed themselves to be the original inhabitants of the land, beings whose existence predated human settlement but who had formed alliances with those humans who showed proper respect for the old ways. Their intervention transformed the battle from a siege into a rout as the attackers found themselves facing opponents whose capabilities exceeded anything they had been trained to handle. Dimensional barriers continued to weaken as the mill's energy output reached levels that threatened to tear permanent openings between parallel worlds, creating possibilities for travel and communication that would revolutionize human understanding of reality. Anna's consciousness served as a stabilizing force that prevented these rifts from expanding beyond control while maintaining sufficient opening to allow beneficial exchanges between dimensions. Her role was evolving from refugee to guardian of interdimensional boundaries that required constant vigilance to maintain. The Order's retreat began as their leadership recognized that they had underestimated both the mill's defensive capabilities and the forces that would respond to protect it. Their torches guttered and died as supernatural energies neutralized their equipment, leaving them to stumble through darkness that seemed to actively oppose their presence. The precision of their assault gave way to chaotic flight as they discovered that the forest itself had become hostile to their continued presence. Thomas Fletcher pursued the fleeing attackers with weapons that seemed to multiply in his hands, his movements revealing combat skills that transcended normal human limitations. His pursuit was not motivated by vengeance, but by the necessity of ensuring that the Order's forces were too scattered and demoralized to regroup for another assault. The mill's energy output stabilized at levels that created permanent changes in the local spiritual landscape, transforming the entire region into a nexus point where multiple dimensions intersected with unusual clarity and stability. Anna's consciousness had become the central processing node for a network that stretched far beyond Millbrook, her awareness touching sacred sites across the countryside that had remained dormant for generations, waiting for someone capable of awakening their full potential. The woman who had faked her death to escape marriage had become the living heart of an ancient system designed to protect and preserve knowledge that conventional authorities sought to suppress or destroy. Dr. Emma Thompson documented the physiological changes that accompanied Anna's transformation, her medical training revealing adaptations that challenged fundamental assumptions about human biology and consciousness. The enhancement process had triggered dormant genetic sequences that suggested human potential was far greater than orthodox science acknowledged, with capabilities that had been systematically suppressed through centuries of deliberate ignorance and active persecution. Anna's resurrection had not merely restored her to life, but activated evolutionary potentials that existed within all humanity, waiting for the proper conditions and catalyst to manifest. The Order of the Silver Dawn's retreat carried implications that extended far beyond their failed assault on the mill, their scattered forces carrying news of supernatural capabilities that would reshape the ongoing conflict between conventional and mystical authority. The attackers who survived the encounter would report to superiors, whose response would likely involve escalation rather than abandonment of their campaign against sites like the mill. Anna's successful defense had won a battle, but might have intensified a war that had been waged in shadows for centuries. Thomas Fletcher's pursuit of the fleeing Order forces revealed the extent of their organization and resources, his supernatural tracking abilities allowing him to follow their retreat. Routes back to staging areas and communication nodes that form part of a vast network dedicated to suppressing mystical knowledge. The Gravedigger's humble exterior had concealed expertise in intelligence gathering that proved crucial in mapping the opposition's capabilities and intentions. His years of protecting the cemetery had been preparation for a larger mission that involved safeguarding the entire network of sacred sites from systematic destruction. Father Patrick Kelly's ancient texts provided historical context for the events unfolding around the mill, revealing patterns of conflict that stretched back through centuries of struggle between those who sought to control supernatural forces and those who worked to preserve the delicate balance between worlds. The priest's scholarly research had uncovered evidence of previous awakenings similar to Anna's transformation, individuals throughout history who had served as catalysts for the activation of dormant mystical networks during periods of particular threat or opportunity. The forest spirits that had manifested during the battle remained visible even after the immediate danger passed, their continued presence indicating permanent changes in the local spiritual environment that would affect everyone who lived in the region. These ancient entities revealed themselves to be guardians whose protection had always existed but had been invisible to most human perception until the mill's awakening created conditions that allowed for clearer communication between species. Their alliance with Anna and her allies represented a restoration of cooperation that had been broken by centuries of human expansion and environmental destruction. Mary O'Connor's hereditary connection to the Guardian network provided access to resources and knowledge that had been carefully preserved through generations of seemingly ordinary families whose true heritage remained hidden from casual observation. Her bloodline carried genetic memories that enabled intuitive understanding of the mystical systems that protected sacred sites. Her servant's disguise having concealed abilities that were now essential for maintaining the network's continued operation. The revelation of her true nature suggested that many apparently normal individuals throughout the countryside might harbor similar hidden capabilities. The mill's transformation continued as chambers and passages that had been sealed for centuries opened to reveal libraries and workshops where ancient knowledge had been preserved against the day when it would again be needed. Anna's exploration of these spaces revealed the true scope of the wisdom that had been protected within the building's mystical architecture, including texts and artifacts that documented technologies and techniques that could revolutionize human understanding of reality. The mill was not merely a refuge, but a repository of accumulated knowledge that spanned millennia of careful preservation. Anna discovered that her enhanced consciousness could communicate directly with other awakened individuals across vast distances, her awareness linking with a network of allies whose abilities complemented her own in the ongoing struggle to protect mystical sites from destruction. The resurrection that had saved her from unwanted marriage had connected her to a community of extraordinary individuals whose mission involved preserving knowledge and capabilities that conventional society sought to suppress. Her isolation as a fugitive was being replaced by membership in a fellowship that transcended geographical and temporal boundaries. The dimensional rifts that had opened during the battle provided access to realms where different versions of reality coexisted, revealing possibilities for human development that had been deliberately concealed by those who benefited from limiting human potential. Anna's exploration of these parallel dimensions showed her glimpses of civilizations where mystical abilities were considered natural and normal, where the boundaries between science and magic had never been artificially imposed. These visions provided guidance for the kind of society that could emerge if the network's mission succeeded in breaking the constraints that limited human consciousness. Dr. Thompson's research revealed that Anna's transformation was not unique, but represented a natural evolutionary step that all humans were capable of achieving under the proper conditions. The enhancement process could be replicated and refined, potentially allowing for the systematic awakening of dormant capabilities throughout the population. The medical knowledge that had enabled Anna's false death and resurrection was part of a larger body of healing arts that could revolutionize human health and longevity while expanding consciousness beyond its current limitations. The communication network that connected the sacred sites began to carry messages about similar awakenings occurring at other locations, confirming that Anna's transformation was part of a larger pattern of mystical activation that was spreading across the region. The mill's successful defense had apparently served as a catalyst that triggered dormant systems at multiple sites, creating a cascade effect that would be impossible for the Order of the Silver Dawn to contain through conventional means. The isolated incident of one woman's escape from marriage was revealing itself to be the beginning of a much larger transformation of human society. Father Kelly's translations of the ancient texts provided prophecies and guidelines that suggested the current awakening was the fulfillment of plans that had been set in motion centuries ago by visionaries who understood that humanity would eventually reach a point where evolutionary advancement became both possible and necessary. The priest's role as spiritual guide was expanding to encompass responsibilities as interpreter of wisdom that would guide the emerging network through the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Thomas Fletcher's intelligence gathering revealed that the Order of the Silver Dawn was itself part of a larger organization whose influence extended into government and military institutions, suggesting that the conflict over mystical knowledge was more complex and dangerous than any of them had initially realized. The Gravedigger's network of contacts included individuals within these conventional power structures who were working to protect the awakening sites from official persecution. The battle for the mill had been won, but the war for the future of human consciousness was just beginning. Anna's role as the central node of the awakening network brought responsibilities that extended far beyond her personal survival and freedom, her decisions and actions now affecting the fate of mystical sites and their guardians throughout the countryside. The woman who had sought only to escape an unwanted marriage was becoming a leader whose choices would determine whether humanity's dormant potentials could be safely awakened or would be suppressed by forces that profited from keeping human consciousness confined within artificial limitations. The mill's great hall transformed into a meeting chamber as representatives from awakened sites across the region gathered for the first Council of Guardians to convene in over 2 centuries, their diverse appearances and abilities reflecting the rich variety of mystical traditions that had been preserved through generations of careful stewardship. Anna found herself at the center of this extraordinary assembly, her recent transformation having established her as the primary conduit through which the network's collective consciousness could manifest and coordinate its activities. The woman, who had begun this journey seeking personal freedom, was now responsible for decisions that would affect the entire balance between conventional and mystical authority. The council members included individuals whose abilities and heritage spanned the full spectrum of supernatural capabilities, from healers whose knowledge surpassed anything taught in medical schools to scholars who had preserved libraries of wisdom that orthodox institutions had tried to destroy. Each representative carried the accumulated knowledge and experience of their particular site, creating a collective wisdom that encompassed centuries of careful observation and experimentation. With forces that conventional science refused to acknowledge, their presence in the mill demonstrated the unprecedented level of cooperation that Anna's awakening had made possible. Dr. Emma Thompson presented medical evidence that the enhancement process which had transformed Anna could be safely adapted for others, who showed the genetic markers that indicated potential for mystical development. Her research revealed that approximately 1 person in 50 carried the dormant capabilities that could be awakened through careful application of the techniques she had developed, suggesting that a significant portion of the population possessed untapped potentials that could revolutionize human society. The implications of this discovery extended far beyond individual transformation to encompass the possibility of species-wide evolutionary advancement. Thomas Fletcher's intelligence reports revealed the true scope of the opposition they faced, with the Order of the Silver Dawn serving as merely the militant arm of a much larger conspiracy that included influential figures in government, military, and religious institutions. The Gravediggers' network of informants had identified key individuals whose positions allowed them to suppress evidence of mystical phenomena while directing resources toward the systematic elimination of sacred sites and their guardians. The conflict was not merely between different philosophical approaches, but between competing visions of humanity's future development. Father Patrick Kelly's historical research provided context for the current crisis by documenting previous periods when mystical networks had been forced to choose between concealment and open resistance to persecution. The priests' translations of ancient texts revealed that such confrontations occurred cyclically throughout history, with each generation of guardians facing the choice between preserving their knowledge in hiding or risking exposure to advance human consciousness. The current awakening represented a particularly critical juncture, where the outcome would determine whether mystical knowledge could finally emerge from the shadows. The Council's deliberations revealed fundamental disagreements about how to respond to the increasing pressure from conventional authorities, with some members advocating continued secrecy, while others argued for open demonstration of their capabilities. Anna's unique position as the network's central node gave her influence over this debate, her decisions potentially determining whether the Guardians would continue their traditional role as hidden protectors or emerge as active agents of human transformation. The responsibility was overwhelming for someone who had never sought leadership but had been thrust into it by circumstances beyond her control. Mary O'Connor's revelation of her true heritage provided crucial intelligence about the extent of the Guardian network, her family's bloodline connecting her to dozens of other sites where similar awakenings were beginning to occur. The servant's humble exterior had concealed knowledge of communication methods and coordination protocols that had been passed down through generations of seemingly ordinary families whose actual mission involved maintaining the infrastructure that supported mystical sites. Her information revealed that the network was far more extensive and organized than any of them had previously realized. The mill's ancient chambers continued to reveal their secrets as the council's presence activated dormant systems throughout the building, with previously sealed rooms opening to provide access to resources that would be essential for the challenges ahead. These newly accessible spaces contain not just books and artifacts, but also technologies that bridge the gap between mystical knowledge and practical application, including devices that could enhance communication between distant sites and tools that could defend against both conventional and supernatural attacks. The mill was revealing itself to be a fortress and command center rather than merely a refuge. Anna's consciousness expanded to encompass the collective awareness of all the council members, her enhanced abilities allowing her to serve as a living link between their diverse perspectives and capabilities. The integration process was both exhilarating and terrifying, as she felt her individual identity beginning to merge with something vastly larger while struggling to maintain the core sense of self that had driven her initial escape from conventional constraints. The balance between personal autonomy and collective responsibility required constant conscious effort to maintain. Reports from distant sites revealed that the awakening process was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, with new nodes of activity appearing throughout the countryside as dormant systems responded to the network's increasing energy output. The mill's successful defense had apparently triggered a cascade effect that was impossible to contain, forcing the council to adapt their plans to accommodate rapid expansion rather than gradual revelation. The careful secrecy that had protected the network for centuries was becoming impossible to maintain as more individuals discovered their hidden capabilities. The dimensional rifts that had opened during the battle provided access to allies from parallel realities, where the conflict between conventional and mystical authority had been resolved in favor of human consciousness expansion. These interdimensional contacts offered resources and knowledge that could accelerate the awakening process while providing strategic advantages against opposition forces. Anna's role as the primary interface with these alternate dimensions made her essential to negotiations that could determine the outcome of the current crisis. Dr. Thompson's continued research revealed that the enhancement process could be refined to awaken specific capabilities rather than triggering general transformation, allowing for the systematic development of individuals whose abilities would complement the network's needs. The possibility of creating specialized guardians with particular strengths opened new strategic options while raising ethical questions about the extent to which human nature should be deliberately modified. The Council's decisions about these enhancement protocols would establish precedents that would affect all future development of mystical capabilities. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Order of the Silver Dawn was preparing for a coordinated assault on multiple sites simultaneously, their strategy designed to overwhelm the network's defenses through sheer scale, rather than attempting to defeat individual locations. Thomas Fletcher's analysis of their capabilities suggested that conventional defensive measures would be insufficient to protect all the sites under threat, forcing the Council to consider options that would require revealing their existence to a broader audience. The time for complete secrecy was ending, whether they chose to abandon it or had it forced upon them. Father Kelly's prophecies indicated that the current crisis represented a prophesied convergence where humanity would either achieve a new level of consciousness or face systematic suppression of its evolutionary potential. The priest's interpretation of ancient texts suggested that the outcome would depend on the courage and wisdom of those who found themselves at the center of the transformation process. Anna's role as the awakening catalyst made her central to prophecies that had been preserved, for centuries waiting for their fulfillment. The Council's final session focused on developing contingency plans for scenarios ranging from successful integration of mystical knowledge with conventional society to open warfare between the network and its opponents. Anna's input was crucial to these discussions because her enhanced consciousness could model the complex interactions between different courses of action and their likely consequences. The woman who had sought only personal freedom was now responsible for decisions that would affect the future development of human civilization itself. The moment of truth arrived when Anna stood before the assembled Council of Guardians, her consciousness fully integrated with the network's collective awareness while maintaining the individual will that had driven her original escape from conventional constraints. The mill's great hall resonated with energies that made the air itself seem to pulse with anticipation, every guardian present understanding that the decisions made in the next few hours would determine whether centuries of hidden knowledge would finally emerge into the light or be driven deeper underground by forces that profited from human limitation. The dimensional rifts that connected the mill to parallel realities reached their maximum stability as interdimensional allies prepared to provide direct assistance in the coming confrontation, their advanced understanding of consciousness expansion, offering strategies and technologies that could tip the balance decisively in favor of the Guardians. Anna's role as the primary interface with these alternate dimensions required her to maintain simultaneous awareness of multiple realities while coordinating actions across different planes of existence. The complexity of the task pushed her enhanced abilities to their absolute limits. Dr. Emma Thompson's final preparations included the synthesis of enhancement compounds that could awaken dormant capabilities in large numbers of people simultaneously. Her medical expertise, having developed techniques for mass consciousness expansion that could create an army of allies in a matter of hours. The ethical implications of such widespread transformation were staggering. But the alternative of allowing the network to be destroyed by conventional forces seemed even more unacceptable. The doctor's research had reached the point where individual choice about mystical development might need to be superseded by species survival. Thomas Fletcher returned from his reconnaissance mission with intelligence that confirmed the Order of the Silver Dawn's preparations for their final assault. Their forces including not just military units, but specialized teams equipped with weapons designed specifically to combat supernatural phenomena. The Gravedigger's analysis revealed that the attackers had learned from their previous failure and were now prepared to deal with the kind of defenses that had protected the mill. Conventional protective measures would no longer be sufficient to ensure the network's survival. Father Patrick Kelly's interpretation of the ancient prophecies reached its culmination as he realized that the current crisis fulfilled the conditions described in texts that had been preserved for millennia, waiting for their moment of relevance. The priest's scholarly work revealed that the outcome of the coming battle would determine not just the fate of the Guardian network, but the entire trajectory of human evolution. The cosmic forces that govern such transitions were aligning in ways that occurred only once in many centuries. The mill's transformation reached completion as the last of its hidden chambers opened to reveal the control center from which the entire regional network could be coordinated and directed. Anna's consciousness expanded to fill this mystical command structure, her awareness encompassing every sacred site and guardian within hundreds of miles, while maintaining the ability to focus on immediate tactical requirements. The building had revealed itself to be not merely a refuge, but the nerve center of an ancient system designed to protect and advance human consciousness. Mary O'Connor's heritage connected her to communication protocols that allowed for instantaneous coordination between all network sites. her bloodline carrying genetic memories of techniques that enabled telepathic contact across vast distances. The servant's true nature, as a hereditary guardian, provided access to resources that had been carefully preserved through generations of apparent normalcy. Her abilities were essential for maintaining cohesion within the network as it faced its greatest challenge since its creation. The forest spirits that had allied with the Guardians during the previous battle revealed their full capabilities as they manifested in increasingly physical forms, their ancient wisdom and supernatural powers adding a crucial element to the network's defenses. These entities had protected the sacred sites since before human civilization began, their alliance with the Guardians representing a restoration of cooperation between species that had been broken by centuries of human expansion. Their intervention would provide advantages that the Order of the Silver Dawn had no way to anticipate or counter. Anna felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders as she realized that her personal journey from trapped woman to awakened Guardian had been orchestrated by forces that operated on timescales measured in centuries and millennia. The resurrection that had saved her from unwanted marriage was revealed to be part of a larger pattern that had been building toward this moment of crisis and opportunity. Her individual choices had been significant, but they had also been guided by wisdom that transcended personal understanding. The dimensional allies provided final briefings on strategic options that could ensure the network's survival while advancing the cause of human consciousness expansion. Their advanced knowledge offering solutions that combined mystical wisdom with practical effectiveness. The technologies they shared included defensive systems that could protect the sacred sites from any conceivable attack, while enhancement techniques that could rapidly increase the number of awakened individuals. Their assistance would be crucial in the coming confrontation. Reports from distant sites confirmed that the awakening process had reached critical mass, with new Guardians manifesting abilities and activating dormant systems faster than the opposition could track or counter. The network's expansion had moved beyond the point where it could be contained through conventional suppression, forcing both sides to prepare for open confrontation rather than continued shadow warfare. The time for secrecy was ending, whether the Guardians chose to reveal themselves or had their existence exposed by their enemies. Dr. Thompson's analysis of the enhancement compounds revealed that they could be dispersed through natural water, systems to reach large populations simultaneously, potentially awakening dormant capabilities in thousands of individuals without their conscious participation in the process. The possibility of involuntary transformation raised profound ethical questions, but the alternative of allowing the network to be destroyed seemed to justify extraordinary measures. The doctor's research had reached the point where species-level intervention might be necessary for survival. Thomas Fletcher's final intelligence reports revealed the Order of the Silver Dawn's ultimate plan: to use the coming assault as cover for the systematic elimination of anyone who showed signs of mystical capability, their campaign extending far beyond the Guardian network, to encompass a general purge of supernatural potential within the human population. The Gravediggers' contacts within conventional institutions confirmed that the opposition's goals were nothing less than the permanent suppression of human evolutionary advancement. The stakes could not be higher. Father Kelly's prayers reached frequencies that resonated with cosmic forces, whose intervention could reshape the fundamental laws that governed the interaction between different levels of reality. His connection to divine authority, providing access to powers that transcended even the advanced capabilities of the Guardian network. The priest's role was evolving from spiritual guide to conduit for forces that could rewrite the basic rules of existence if the situation demanded such extreme measures. Anna's consciousness reached its maximum expansion as she prepared to coordinate. The network's response to the coming assault, her awareness encompassing not just the immediate tactical situation, but the long-term implications of every possible course of action. The woman who had begun this journey seeking personal freedom was about to make decisions that would affect the future of human consciousness itself. The moment of ultimate choice had arrived, and the fate of two different visions of humanity's future hung in the balance. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.